right, welcome everyone. Patrick Ellis here, ready to kick off our second edition of the ECONversations with our economic development superheroes here for Southwest Riverside County and Riverside County. We have Kimberly Davidson with the city of Wildomar. We have Scott Agajanian, who just popped into the screen from the city of Murrieta. Gina Gonzalez at the city of Menifee, Grant Taylor at the city of Lake Elsinore, Christine Damko at the city of Temecula, and Wilson, as we like to refer to him, is Rob Moran with the county economic development department. So thank you all for joining me again. Wanted to kick off today's discussion with what we were just discussing right before we came on here, which is reopening. We just had the announcement last week from the governor. We had different things happen within our county and the state. And so now certain aspects of business have started to reopen. So kind of wanted to kind of get your gist on what's going on in each one of your communities and, you know, kind of what we see coming here soon. So, you know, Kimberly, maybe you want to kick it off for us.
Well, I guess we're still trying to figure that out at this point as well, and trying to understand the current state of affairs. So I don't know if you want to start with me, but you know, just waiting to understand more from the county and what this means as far as where we can go, and from the state as far as what businesses can open next. I know that we've got a lot of curbside pickup, and businesses are struggling to accommodate that and change their business models so that they can accommodate that. We have retail businesses that you can't have customers inside, and so they're trying to change their business model to a pickup and delivery type option that maybe they've never done before. So just trying to understand the orders and how to shift those business models to accommodate the current state of affairs.
And I know that people are you know, being very inventive with the way that, you know, they're trying to address these too, right? So, you know, you have Yellow Basket that's both in Wildomar,
right,
and Menifee, and in Temecula, and you know, they're, I think starting today, they're starting to do,
yep,
you know, going back to the old
sock
kind
hop.
of, yeah, the sock hop kind of drive-in, you know, type of feel, which I think is neat, and it's unique and it's different. And so
Yep.
I think that, you know, there are definitely those businesses that are, you know, really taking things and reimagining it for themselves.
Absolutely. And that's definitely one of the highlights of what has come out of this crisis, are the inventive and innovative ways that some business owners are reimagining their businesses and reimagining how they can get their products or services to their customers. And certainly Yellow Basket, bringing back the 50s sock hop, the old format like A&W root beer where they bring it out to your car at the drive-in, is really one way that they're trying to accommodate the social distancing and staying away from others' order.
Good. So Gina, what's going on in Menifee right now? I know that I think we're all still a little confused. I know that we're, you know, on the Economic Recovery Task Force, we're talking about, you know, what's going to happen tomorrow at the Board of Supervisors meeting. We're talking about presenting a plan to the governor by the end of the week for more opening in stage 2 and hopefully into stage 3. You know, I know that there's a lot of confusion. What are you, you know, talking with your businesses about right now?
I think the city overall is trying to understand exactly the limitations or restrictions that have been put on our business community a little bit more. I think even at the state level, it's even confusing with what they've listed out. In one point it says, you know, curbside and delivery only, but then if you look at the guidelines, it says shall or should, and it doesn't necessarily make it feel restricted to just that. So I think that as a city, we're still trying to understand the legal ramifications and what we're able to do with our businesses now that the county has kind of lifted some of their recent orders that was more restrictive than the state. So I think now everybody's kind of like working to figure that piece out and how we can be creative with our existing business with those guidelines But before you can become more creative with those guidelines, you have to really understand them. So it's kind of what we're going through right now collectively. So we hope to have some clarification tomorrow at the governor's news conference on dining establishments and what that could look like. I know that he left us all on a hanger today and said, I don't want to ruin that for you tomorrow. So let's just wait for tomorrow. But in the meantime, there could be another business that just closed up. So we're very concerned about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I think, Christine, I'm sure that, Temecula's got to be extremely excited about whatever that announcement is regarding dining tomorrow, obviously with, the huge amount of restaurant that you have in the community. But, and I know that you have probably the challenge too of figuring out is, you've got different restaurants and such in Old Town that are trying to get open and cater to, those that are coming out on, especially on the weekends, what do you have going on in Temecula in that regard?
Really, we're trying to facilitate the regulations passed down by the state and give our businesses the opportunity for development and moving forward. So really in Old Town, as an example, in Old Town, there isn't essentially a lot of curbside pickup space, if you will. And so what we're having businesses down in Old Town, for example, contact our Public Works Department directly. And our Public Works Department will work one-on-one with the business and figure out a plan of where in Old Town the proper pickup location would be, for example. A lot of our shopping centers are on private property. So that's very easy, if you will. I see Best Buy. I just saw Kohl's this weekend started doing their curbside. So that's all on private property. And they really do have the room with the parking spaces. I know the Promenade Mall is going to start rolling out curbside pickup. And when you say curbside pickup at the mall, it's essentially within the parking spaces. So over the next week, we're excited to see some retailers in the Promenade Mall really start to open up for that curbside pickup.
That's interesting, and I think we kind of forget about the mall to an extent in that regard with all those businesses that are impacted, and it's good to hear that some of them are going to have at least an ability to do that. And I think you're right. I think we overlook that, places like the Old Town area where you don't have that private property to have that curbside pickup stuff. And so logistically, it causes so many different issues that, people don't understand and realize. And so, I think we talked about it before, but I think it is a time of where we have to be patient and everyone has to understand is there's a lot of different dynamics that go on with these different, regulations and such. So, so Scott and Murrieta, so what I know that you love the place that you're in because everyone keeps calling you asking, hey, can I open? I'm sure you love that aspect. So what's going on in Murrieta right now?
Well, thank you, Patrick, Apollo, Ellis. Murrieta is going through the same thing that all of our cities are in the sense that, we've got everybody kind of wondering, what does this mean to me? We're putting out statewide and countywide orders that say we're getting a little bit closer to the days where we can be open and a little bit more free, but people kind of don't recognize where they fall in because the orders don't necessarily spell out their business. So we have a lot of people looking for clarification right now, and that's what we're all doing too. We're all trying to look for clarification. I know you and I were both talking to the same business owner today who'd reached out to both of us individually asking for answers, and I think they were getting two different answers from us because I read it one way and you were reading it another way. So that's the hard part about this. But the good news is that every day it seems as though we actually are getting a day closer to the days where we have our businesses reopened. And I think that puts the onus on a lot of our business owners to start thinking about having a plan for safety, having a plan for reopening, and starting to think, what do my customers want to see when they walk in the doors? Because they will be walking in the door soon. And how do I differentiate myself from all the other companies, right? So you're going to have a shopping experience in my store that is clean and safe and healthy and make you feel good about coming in. I think for a while now, we've seen our superstores get really bombarded with shoppers because in addition to having consumer goods, they also have grocery. And so that gave them the opportunity to be open during this time. But that puts a lot of pressure on those stores for a lot of additional shoppers. And opening up some of these other stores may spread some of that wealth a little bit and give other stores an ability to take some of that burden off of these stores and actually reduce the density in some of the shopping experiences that you're seeing right now. So I think as we get closer, it's really good news, but it's also an opportunity for stores to plan ahead about how do you reimagine the way that people shop in your location.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point in that having a reopening plan is going to be so strategic for businesses, and I know that there's a lot of different industry associations out there that are working on different ones for their industries, but I think it is going to be very important and incumbent on businesses to make sure that they have a plan in place and that they're expressing exactly what that plan is to their customers, because being able to communicate that's going to be extremely important for people to be comfortable to go back to visiting that business, whatever it might be. So Grant, Lake Elsinore, we have the fun thing that now the launch point is reopened and the motocross is open and hopefully maybe some other extreme sports stuff. So obviously that's a whole different dynamic. What's going on with that, which I think is a huge aspect to Lake Elsinore in your economy.
Well, it is, Patrick. The launch point closure was a big economic development blow. And from what we understand from the state and the county's guidelines, which are not crystal clear, we're trying to make the best we can out of them. The lake is open, you can boat, you can camp. We still haven't opened the community center, that's public assembly. The restaurant is still not open, and I believe the pool and splash pad are still closed. The restriction was lifted on race courses, so the motocross was allowed to open this week, and they were in full swing this morning. The order hasn't been lifted on skydive, which makes sense because when you go up, you're all crammed into a relatively small plane, hopefully. But, my colleagues hit all the vitals. Businesses are trying to figure out where do they fall. I mean, the essential businesses are pretty clear. That's cut and dried. But some of the others, and especially the dining's not real clear cut. Went to a sandwich shop today in unincorporated Riverside. They let us dine inside. And I was with a fire marshal and a building official, guy in uniforms, and I didn't argue or push back. We're just trying to, I have business asking me, can we open? Is it okay? The essential, the answer is easy. The non-essential, not so easy. They ask me, what's the city going to do if I open? And the answer is nothing. We're not going to enforce until we get clear-cut standards that stay, that don't change from day to day or hour to hour like they have been. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really critical for businesses to have a reopening plan. Continue with best practices. Wear masks, social distancing. Do the right thing to be safe. Better safe than sorry. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get some more concrete information on dining, because it's killing us on Main Street. We got 11 restaurants, and they're all takeout or delivery, and so hopefully we'll get back to some normalcy soon and get some clear, consistent guidelines to help our businesses reemerge.
Very good.
I was going to say, I would suggest, if any businesses are looking for some of those guidelines to go on the governor's website for their particular business and get an idea of what some of those guidelines are starting to look like. That could be a like and similar type of business, because some of them, for instance, if they are requiring certain businesses to do the temperature checks, to start to think ahead of what that could look like, as you were talking about, Patrick, to open up and be ahead of the curve for that, right? Because if it's a requirement, if there's a 6-week delay on, acquiring some of those, PPEs or whatever that's needed, it's going to affect their opening. And if there's a certification process that the state puts in place for that, is it self-certification? Is it enforced by somebody? I think these are all the questions that everybody's looking for guidance on right now. But they could start looking at what that would look like and if they could prepare for whatever that may look like. So there's
yeah, and I totally agree. We mentioned that in our task force meeting today too, is that, that the governor has these different, industry sectors identified and is already building out what is going to be expected of them, when they are able to reopen. And so, yeah, I think every business should be in there having printed that out, gone through it, and using that as their template for their reopening plan, without a doubt. Yeah. So that's perfect transition to Rob. So Rob Moran with the county, who I have spent more Zoom calls than I think anybody in the last week and a half. But I appreciate Rob immensely. Rob, why don't you kind of give us your perspective from the county, and kind of let us know what you're seeing and what you're actually hoping for this week.
Well, no, and I thanks, Patrick. I appreciate that. And Scott mentioned it a little bit earlier that every day that goes by, we're heading in the right direction. It seems like, and certainly it's probably not fast enough as much as we'd all like. But I think from the county's perspective, obviously we've pretty much rescinded and gotten out of the health order business, and with the exception of 1 or 2 for specific reasons. But it's the state of California that originally started this, and then it came down to the level. And we're basically saying, let's just revert back to the original source with the stay-at-home orders, and then defining what essential businesses are or are not. And now, they've kind of moved into this, moving away from the essential to non-essential to lower risk and higher risk. And I think what we're hoping for this weekend is, Patrick, you mentioned earlier that there's this recovery task force. So the Board of Supervisors created a recovery task force in late April 21st, basically with the idea of, getting key stakeholders from throughout the county, knowing that in the early stages, it wasn't going to be everybody from every sector and representing every constituency. It was really, we needed to move quickly in order to get people to the table to start talking about reopening. And then ultimately, as you get into more of a longer term recovery, I think that's the point where you might want to add folks. And even since the beginning, we've added folks, and the task force has added folks. But the idea was to put together a framework, which will be heard before the Board of Supervisors tomorrow, kind of outlining the thoughts and ideas and key principles to the reopening, getting further into stage 2 as it's known. Others have mentioned it's, curbside pickup and so forth. And now it's really moving more aggressively into the later stages of stage 2 and what, some of the health and safety considerations would be. And so the board's going to hear that tomorrow. And then as I think Gina mentioned, or someone else mentioned, the governor's set to make a further announcement tomorrow at noon. And so we're all anxiously awaiting what that is, and whether that's, dine-in seating or with the restaurants. And
yeah,
I think we're excited about that and moving forward with a framework and ultimately demonstrating to the governor that, we are ready to move forward. We've got the plans and principles in place to do that.
Very good.
I have a great idea for the chamber. There's a way for you guys to make a little money on this one. Remember, like when you go, like the fast passes for those restaurants, when they do go to 50% occupancy by doing a fast pass.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah, it's funny. I've heard quite a few different ideas and thoughts over the last week and a half or so on all these different calls I've been on as to how things are going to be impacted. And I heard everything from, which I think I think it's a genius idea. It's a little more expensive on the front end, but is a restaurant moving to reservations only. They have, they end up getting one of these quick 10-minute tests. You come in prior to your reservation, 10 minutes prior to, you take a test, and then that way, if everyone is negative, then your seating capacity is a little bit better, because you now have proven that everyone there is negative for the test. You've done your due diligence in every way, shape, and form. It's an interesting concept. And then if you test positive, you lose your reservation.
Positive for what?
Huh?
COVID? Test positive for what?
Yeah.
For COVID?
Yeah.
What if you're exposed yesterday and
No, I trust me. There's all sorts of different. That is a rabbit hole that we are not going down. But I'm just telling you, I have heard all sorts of different types of scenarios over the last couple of weeks.
wow.
That's just
Right.
one of them.
But then the criticism from the restaurants is that, at least what I have received as criticism, is that anything that strays from their original business plan of how they originally opened a year ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, is not going to garner them the income that they need to sustain the level that they have been sustaining up until now. So
Right. Yeah.
they opened per the square footage. They did a lot of calculations based on that square footage and the amount of people 6 months ago that they could put into that square footage. So even in the best case scenario, and fully understanding that this is just where we're at, and this is what I've tried to relay to my business owners that have reached out to me to complain about that. Yeah, I get that. You're just going to have to get creative. But, even in the best case scenario, other than us opening back up to full capacity again at some point, hopefully, going to reservation only being able to seat, a certain percentage of that original capacity goal is just not going to do very well for a majority of our businesses.
And go ahead, Rob.
Oh, no, our society and kind of all of our models are based on having these centralized locations where people congregate, and that we try to get as many people as we can into all these places over and over again.
That's
and
right.
that's come to this sudden stop. And everything's based on it. Our business models, our leasing models for malls and shopping centers and restaurants. And now we're in this new situation where we're saying you can't, at least for the short term, transition right back to that same model that was available 2 months ago. And so that's going to be real interesting to see how, folks adapt to that. And who's to say what it's going to be like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, and what's going to be permanently impacted and not impacted, or are we going to be here a year from now, just kind of have forgotten this, or are there going to be new permanent changes to the way we operate in certain locations? It's really hard to say, but yeah, that old model of lots of people in one place as often as you can get them has been completely and totally disrupted, as we all know. And that's tough to recover from.
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to kind of look at for the long term of how do I adjust for that, right? So the short term is, yes, revenue is not going to be where it was when this all came to a head. Every business has to adjust to that. Restaurant business is one of those is impacted, the most in that regard. They're gonna have to be kind of a combination of a few things. One being there's got to be more help coming from the federal government to help those types of small businesses, right? That's why, we've been very engaged with our Save Small Business Coalition and working with ICSC for this America's Recovery Act fund. That's going to be one part of it. Another part of it is going to be having to be creative and working with the communities that they work within. If I have the ability to put 1 or 2 tables right outside my front door, even though it's technically not a patio, is my community, my city going to let me do some creative things on a temporary basis to just help with some of those. I think that there's going to have to be this give and take in this very creative space right now. And it's tricky because there's so many different factors that go into it. But I think that's where we're at now. And I agree with you, Rob. I think we all have to kind of start thinking about it differently now. I think that this is the new norm. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to go back to the way it was. And I think that everyone has to reevaluate their business, not just the restaurants. I mean, everything, retail, everything that has been based on that kind of scenario. So.
Well, and I think if it does go back to normal, there's always the opportunity come winter again for this to happen again, or the next virus. If it can happen once, it can happen a million times. So I think that everyone should be aware of that as well. If you think that at some point we're going to go back to normal, whatever normal is, that's probably going to be a false sense of security there. And you should be ready for the next one, because if it can happen, if it's not coronavirus the next time, maybe it'll be something different. But and that's really what this crisis, I think, has done for our businesses. There's always been a sense of needed innovation in business. That we've always needed businesses to innovate. We've always needed business owners to be creative. But when times were good, like we just came out of, times were really good. And some people, just like right before we headed into the recession, there's some business owners that can get by on what they're selling alone, and they don't need a lot of innovation. But this has really thrown everybody into a spotlight where we're really seeing the business owners that are able to innovate, and we're seeing the ones that are just going to plug their nose and stomp their feet, and they're just not going to, they're not going to change. And that's what I've been trying to convey to my business owners. I get it. You're mad. You're not happy about this, but there's not a third option. You're either going to need to innovate and figure out how to survive in this new normal, no one likes it being said the new normal, but you can be mad at the rain all you want. That doesn't stop the rain. You've got to figure out how to live within the parameters that you are given. And I think we're just seeing some businesses are doing that very, very well in different industries, and some are just refusing to change anything. So I think that's a norm in business anyways. It's just being thrown into a spotlight right now.
And that's an excellent point. I was just thinking about this, that I think, because as we've all lived through, there's been the bird flu or the West Nile, there's been avian flu, SARS,
H1N1.
Yeah, and you can go down over the last 10 years, and every couple of years there's a significant situation that up until now hasn't really impacted us. But I think going forward, that where the business community has to adapt is be somewhat kind of like other retailers have, but in particular, we're talking about restaurants, some of those, a little bit more omni-channel, because I think even if next year or 2 years from now, there's a totally different situation that comes up. Even if the state or feds or the local government does nothing, consumer behavior is going to say, you know what, I'm going to kind of lay low for the next couple of months because there's this thing that's out there. And even if the state doesn't do anything or the counties don't do anything from a public health standpoint, I think there's going to be people that are just going to say, you know what, I think it's just better that I'll be the one to go get the food for takeout. Let's not go into the restaurant until this thing, we hear what's going on with this thing. So I think there's going to be kind of a reaction that we probably haven't seen, because people will be just, it's just a new kind of conditioning to some extent, because this has been so impactful that I think there's going to be a lot of folks, particularly if they are in those, traditionally vulnerable populations, that they may just say, you know what, I'm going to stay home. I'm not going to do it.
And luckily, our society is geared for that right now. I mean, that's part of the good news, if there is any good news. If this had happened back in the 80s, this would have been a much different landscape. But you really can. We have all of the tools available to innovate and do delivery and do curbside pickup and call from your mobile phone from right out front, and they can bring it to you. We have all of the tools to be able to do that. It's just a matter, I think, of how the business owners choose to put them together and make best use of those tools.
Hey, let me
Christine was going to say something there. Christine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Really, this is an opportunity for the
Can't hear you.
this is an opportunity for the businesses. As it was mentioned before, the consumer behavior, you have people who are forced to now use social media to figure out what restaurants are open and what retailers are offering curbside. You're seeing clothing retailers who are not necessarily selling clothes on websites, but now they are showing off their merchandise on Facebook Live and saying, hey, I have this in a small, medium, and large, $19.99, come pick it up curbside. I'm seeing around Temecula restaurants, they have some very well-run pickup stations in front of their restaurants that I think would be very profitable after COVID. That might be some new ingenuity there. So actually commend quite a few of our businesses for taking the bull by its horns and kicking butt out there with what they're doing that I think would be sustainable and great business models past this pandemic.
Agreed.
I agree.
Rob, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, no, I think, out of the phoenix rises out of the ashes, right? So since I'm your neighbor over here, Wilson, I thought there is no question that we have a resilient group of entrepreneurs here in this region and in Riverside County, and we don't discount the negative impact this has had on any of them, but we know with certainty that there's going to be some really cool creativity and ingenuity that comes out of our business community, albeit perhaps painful to get there, but our businesses will thrive once again, and we will see a day when things are humming along just fine, and with new models that are going to be kind of cool to be a part of, and that maybe force us to rethink the way that we buy things or the way we frequent restaurants or how much office space we need. And so I think there's going to be some really cool opportunities. I know it for a fact. We just have to get through this difficult time right now to get there. But there'll be some really cool innovations that come out of this.
Yeah, very good. Well, I thank you guys all again for doing this. So until next week, hopefully next week we'll have a lot of really cool stuff to talk about, because hopefully we'll have some great information about new reopenings and submitted information to the governor's office and all sorts of fun stuff in that regard. So thank you again. Join us next week on the ECONversations with your economic development directors for Southwest Riverside County. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.